We think we know so much. We have phones that connect us to the world. We have sent robots to Mars. We can edit genes. But the past is a stubborn thing. It holds its secrets tight. There are places and objects and stories from long ago that make no sense. They are like a splinter in the mind of science. They remind us that we are not the first clever people to walk this planet. And they raise a big question. If we cannot understand what they did, do we really understand ourselves? We look at giant stones moved with impossible precision. We read books in languages that nobody can translate. We find objects that should not exist for another 1,000 years. These are not just old stories. They are active, unsolved cases. And they keep a lot of very smart people up at night. In number 17, where is Cleopatra's final resting place? Everyone knows the story of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, a queen and a Roman general. Their love affair and political alliance ended in tragedy. After their defeat at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, they retreated to Alexandria in Egypt. The victorious Roman Octavian, who would later become Emperor Augustus, closed in. Antony, hearing a false report of Cleopatra's death, killed himself. Cleopatra, facing the humiliation of being paraded through Rome as a captive, chose her own end. The popular story says she let an ASP, a venomous snake, bite her. The historian Plutarch, writing about 150 years later, tells us Octavian was furious. He had wanted her alive, but he supposedly granted her final wish to be buried with Antony. And then their tomb vanishes from history. We know it existed. Ancient writers described it as a lofty and beautiful monument near a temple of the goddess Isis in Alexandria. But where is it now? 2,000 years of history have been rough on Alexandria. Earthquakes have shaken the city. Tsunamis have washed over its coastline. A significant portion of the ancient city, including the royal quarter where Cleopatra lived, is now underwater in the harbor. For centuries, finding the tomb seemed impossible, a lost cause. Then, in the 21st century, the search picked up again. A Dominican Egyptian archaeological mission led by Dr. Kathleen Martinez began excavating a site called Taposiris Magna. It is about 30 miles west of Alexandria. Why there? Martinez's theory is that Cleopatra, knowing the Romans would likely desecrate a tomb in the city, might have arranged for a secret burial in a sacred temple far from Roman eyes. A temple dedicated to Isis, the goddess with whom Cleopatra closely identified, would be the perfect spot. The work at Taposiris Magna has been going on for over a decade. They have found some incredible things. They have discovered a huge cemetery outside the temple with mummies buried facing the temple. This suggests someone important was inside. They found tunnels running deep under the temple. They found coins bearing Cleopatra's face and name. They even found a headless statue of a Ptolemaic king and a foundation plaque, proving the temple was dedicated by one of her ancestors. Everything points to the site being incredibly important during her reign. Zahi Hawass, the former Egyptian Minister of Antiquities, once worked closely with Martinez and was optimistic, telling the media in 2009 they were on the verge of a major discovery. But the tomb itself remains elusive. Ground-penetrating radar has identified anomalies that could be chambers, but excavation is slow and difficult. The problem is that while the clues are tantalizing, none of them are definitive proof. The coins just prove the temple was active during her time. The important burials outside could be for priests or nobles. The tomb could have been looted centuries ago and destroyed, leaving nothing behind. Or the entire theory could be wrong. Cleopatra might be exactly where the ancient writers said she was, in a tomb now lost forever beneath the waves and modern buildings of Alexandria. The search continues, a multi-million-dollar gamble on a single theory. Scientists and historians wait, wondering if the final chapter of one of history's greatest dramas will ever be found. What if the tomb is exactly where the ancient texts say it is, but it's buried under 20 feet of water and silt? Could a tomb, even one made for a queen, survive 2 millennia of earthquakes and underwater currents? If it is at Taposiris Magna, why would she choose a site so far from her beloved Antony, who almost certainly died and was initially buried in Alexandria? And what if the Romans did find it, took the treasure, and deliberately destroyed every trace of it to erase her memory from history? Number 16, how did ancient people cut Puma Punku's stones so perfectly? In the highlands of Bolivia, not far from the shores of Lake Titicaca, lie the ruins of Tiwanaku. It was the capital of a powerful pre-Inca empire, and within this larger archaeological site is a place that defies explanation, Puma Punku. The name means the door of the puma. What you see there are stones, but these are not just any stones. They are massive blocks of red sandstone and andesite, a hard volcanic rock. Some of them weigh over 100 tons, and they are cut with a precision that is baffling. We are talking about surfaces that are perfectly flat. We are talking about right angles that are truly 90 degrees. We are talking about complex interlocking shapes like giant Lego bricks. Some stones known as H blocks are all identical, suggesting they were mass produced. They have smooth drill holes and intricate interior corners that look like they were made with a machine. The joints between blocks are so tight you cannot fit a razor blade between them. There is no mortar. The stones were designed to fit together perfectly. The official timeline says Puma Punku was built by the Tiwanaku culture around 500 to 600 AD. At that time, according to mainstream archaeology, the people of the Andes did not have writing. They did not have the wheel, and they certainly did not have iron tools. Their strongest metal was a bronze alloy, which is much softer than andesite. So how did they do it? How did they quarry a 100-ton block of andesite, transport it over miles of rough terrain, and then cut it with the precision of a modern machinist using only stone hammers, bronze chisels, and manpower? This is the mystery of Puma Punku. Engineers and stonemasons who visit the site just shake their heads. They say that to replicate that work today, you would need diamond-tipped power tools, computer-aided design, and laser cutters. The mainstream archaeological explanation is that it was done through immense time and patience. They suggest the builders used stone pounders to slowly chip away at the blocks and use sand and water as an abrasive to grind the surfaces smooth. Archaeologist Jean-Pierre Protzen of the University of California, Berkeley, spent years studying the site. He published papers like Who Taught the Inca Stonemasons Their Skills in the Journal of the Society of Architectural Historians in 1986, arguing that the techniques were possible with the tools available. He conducted experiments showing that stone tools could work the rock, but he admitted the level of skill and labor required was almost unimaginable. Others are not so sure. They look at the clean lines and perfect angles and say that the simple pound and grind theory does not hold up. It does not explain the small, intricate drill holes or the sharp internal corners. This has led to more extreme theories. Some people, like author Brian Forster, suggest the builders had a lost advanced technology. Perhaps a form of sonic drill, or a tool that could soften the rock. Of course, there is no physical evidence for such technology. Then there are the ancient astronaut theorists who claim it must have been done with alien help. While that is a huge leap, it shows how deeply the site puzzles people. The stonework seems to belong to a different time. It looks more like a modern, pre-fabricated construction site than an ancient temple. The stones lie scattered on the ground, a jumble of perfect, broken pieces from a cataclysmic event, maybe an earthquake or a flood. It is a puzzle we cannot seem to solve. If they really did this with just stone and bronze tools, where are all the broken and worn out tools? Why aren't there mountains of them at the site? How did they maintain such perfect uniformity across dozens of H blocks without written plans or advanced mathematics? And if they had this incredible stoneworking skill, why is it not seen in other Tiwanaku structures to the same degree? Was Puma Punku a special project built by a secret guild of master craftsmen whose techniques died with them? Number 15, what does the Phaistos Disc say? In 1908, an Italian archaeologist named Luigi Prenier was digging in the ruins of a Minoan palace on the island of Crete. The Minoans were a Bronze Age civilization, one of the earliest in Europe. In the basement of the palace at Phaistos, he found a small round object made of fired clay. It was about 6 inches in diameter and covered on both sides with a spiral of stamped symbols. This became known as the Phaistos Disc. It dates to about 1700 BC, and it is one of the greatest puzzles in archaeology. The mystery is the script itself. There are 242 symbols in total, but they are made from a set of 45 unique stamps. The symbols are pictographs. They show people, animals, plants, and tools. They are arranged in groups, separated by lines, spiraling from the edge of the disc to the center. It looks like writing. It feels like writing. But nobody can read it. The script on the Phaistos Disc is a complete one-off. No other object with this writing has ever been found. In linguistics, this is a nightmare. It is what is called a hapax legomenon, a word or script that appears only once. The great successes in deciphering ancient languages, like Egyptian hieroglyphs, relied on the Rosetta Stone. And the Rosetta Stone had the same text in three scripts: hieroglyphs, a simpler Egyptian script, and Greek. Because we could read Greek, we had a key. For the Phaistos Disc, there is no key. There is not enough text to do a proper statistical analysis to figure out the patterns of the language. So what does it say? Over the last century, dozens of people, from serious academics to amateur enthusiasts, have claimed to have deciphered it. The proposed translations are all over the map. Some say it is a hymn to a goddess. Others say it is a legal document, a calendar, a list of soldiers, or even a story. Some have argued it is not a Cretan language at all, but a form of Anatolian, Greek, or Semitic. In 2014, a linguist named Gareth Owens, who has studied the disc for years, proposed that he had a partial understanding. Working with a colleague from the Technological Educational Institute of Crete, he argued that the disc is a religious text, a prayer to a mother goddess. He identified keywords based on their frequency and comparison to other Minoan scripts, like Linear A, but his translation is still debated and not widely accepted. There is even a theory that the whole thing's a hoax. In a 2008 article for Minerva magazine, Jerome M. Eisenberg, an expert in antiquities, argued that Luigi Pernier could have faked the disc. He pointed out that the clay was fired in a way that seemed unusually perfect, and the circumstances of its discovery were a bit too convenient. Most archaeologists, however, reject the forgery theory. They point out that deciphering Minoan scripts was in its infancy in 1908, and a forger would have had to be a genius to create something so linguistically complex. So the disc sits in a museum in Heraklion, Crete, silently mocking us. It is a message from 4,000 years ago, and we are deaf to it. It is a tiny object that represents a huge gap in our knowledge of the ancient world. It is the oldest example of printing in the world, with its use of pre-made stamps to create the text. But the genius who created it remains anonymous, and their words are lost to time. Will we ever find another example of this script, a Rosetta Stone for the Phaistos Disc? Is it even a language, or could it be a mnemonic device, board game, or something we cannot even conceive of? If it is a prayer which goddess was so important that her words were preserved in this unique, permanent way? And what if the hoax theory is right, and one of the world's greatest ancient mysteries is just the work of a clever forger from 100 years ago? Number 14, who carved the Nazca Lines. From the air, the dry, flat desert plains of southern Peru look like a giant sketchpad. Scratched across the landscape are hundreds of enormous designs. There are simple geometric shapes, straight lines, triangles, trapezoids, and spirals. Some of the lines run perfectly straight for miles, and then there are the figures. There is a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey with a curling tail, a lizard, a pelican, and a human-like figure often called the astronaut. These are the Nazca Lines. They are so big that you can only truly appreciate them from high above. They were created by the Nazca culture between 500 BC and 500 AD. They made them by removing the reddish-brown iron oxide-coated pebbles that cover the surface of the desert. This exposed the lighter-colored ground underneath. Because this region is one of the driest on Earth, with little rain or wind, the lines have been preserved for centuries. The mystery is not so much how they were made, but why. Why would a culture spend so much time and effort creating massive drawings that they themselves could never see in their entirety? You cannot stand on a nearby hill and see the monkey. You need to be hundreds of feet in the air. The Nazca people did not have airplanes, so what was the point? The first serious study of the lines was done by the German mathematician and astronomer Maria Rietzsche in the 1940s. She dedicated her life to studying and preserving the lines. Rietzsche believed they were a giant astronomical calendar. She proposed that the lines were aligned with the sun, moon, and stars, marking important dates like the solstices, which would be crucial for an agricultural society. Her book, Mystery on the Desert, laid out her theories. For a long time, this was the leading explanation. However, later studies by people like Gerald Hawkins, who had famously studied Stonehenge, used computers to check the astronomical alignments. They found that while some lines did match up with celestial events, many did not. The number of matches was not much more than you would expect from random chance. So other theories emerged. Some researchers like Anthony Avini, an archaeoastronomer, have suggested the lines are related to water. In the desert, water is life. Aveni and others have found that many of the lines seem to point towards sources of water. or are connected to underground water systems. They might have been used in rituals to summon water from the gods. This theory is supported by the fact that some of the animal figures, like spiders and hummingbirds, were associated with fertility and rain in ancient Andean cultures. A more recent theory proposed by researchers at Yamagata University in Japan, who have been using AI to identify new geoglyphs since 2004, is that the lines serve different purposes over time. The smaller figurative designs might have been for rituals, while the larger geometric shapes might have been used to mark pathways for religious processions between sacred sites. People would walk the lines as part of a sacred ceremony. This would explain why they did not need to be seen from above. The act of walking the path was the important part. Of course, there is always the fringe theory. Eric von Daniken, in his 1968 book Chariots of the Gods, famously claimed the lines were runways for alien spacecraft. Most scientists dismiss this idea completely. They point out the ground is too soft for landings, and the designs are not what you would expect for functional runways. The answer is almost certainly rooted in the religion and worldview of the Nazca people. But their culture disappeared over 1,000 years ago, leaving behind no written records. They left only these silent giant pictures in the sand. How did they achieve such precision on such a massive scale without an aerial viewpoint? Were they using small models and scaling them up with grids of stakes and rope? If the lines were ritual pathways, what did the rituals involve, and who were they for? And why did they stop making them? Did their gods stop listening? Or did the culture simply change, leaving the old ways and their giant desert drawings behind? Number 13. What was the real purpose of the Roman dodecahedron? Across the former territory of the Roman Empire, from Wales to Hungary, archaeologists have found a strange and beautiful object. It is a small, hollow dodecahedron. That means it is a 12-sided object, with each side being a pentagon. It is usually made of bronze, though some are stone. Each of the 12 faces has a circular hole in it, and the holes are often different sizes. Little knobs, or studs, stick out from each corner where the pentagons meet. Over 100 of these have been found, dating from the 2nd to the 4th century AD, and we have absolutely no idea what they were for. This is a true mystery because the Romans were fantastic record keepers. We have Roman texts on everything from military strategy and architecture to cooking and farming. But there is not a single known mention of these dodecahedrons in any Roman text or illustration. It is as if they never existed. All we have are the objects themselves. The theories are all over the place. One popular idea is that it was a measuring device, perhaps a rangefinder for Roman artillery. The theory goes that by looking through the holes on opposite sides, an officer could calculate the distance to an enemy formation. But tests of this theory have not been very convincing. The different sizes of the holes do not seem to follow any logical mathematical sequence for this purpose. Another idea is that it was an astronomical instrument used to determine the optimal time for sowing winter grain. The idea is that you would look through the holes at the sun on a specific date, and the angle of the light would tell you if the time was right. This is a clever theory, but it only works at specific latitudes, and the dodecahedrons have been found all over the empire. Could it be a toy? Maybe a die for a game we no longer know the rules to. This is possible, but they seem very ornate and difficult to make for a simple toy. They are often crafted with great care. A recent find in 2023 near Lincoln, England, was described by the local archaeology liaison as being in fantastic condition, perfectly cast and undamaged. What about a religious object? This is a strong possibility. It could have been a ritual object, perhaps a candle holder, or a symbolic mace for a priest of a particular cult. The knobs could be for decoration or to hold something. The lack of any written mention might even support this. If it was part of a mystery cult like the cult of Mithras, its purpose might have been a closely guarded secret. One of the most unusual and practical theories is that it was a tool for knitting gloves. A Dutch researcher demonstrated that by placing the dodecahedron on a table and looping yarn around the knobs, you could use it as a frame to knit the fingers of a glove. This is an ingenious idea, but it does not explain why you would need such a complex and expensive bronze object to do something that could be done with a simpler tool. Plus, Roman-era gloves are extremely rare in the archaeological record. The simple fact is, we do not know. The dodecahedron is a perfect example of a historical blind spot. It was common enough that we have found over 100 of them across a vast area, yet its function was so specific or so secret that it was never written down. It is a common object from a well-documented civilization that remains a complete enigma. Why are there no written records of this object anywhere? Was its function so common that nobody thought to write it down, like explaining how to use a spoon? Or was it so secret that writing it down was forbidden? Why are the holes on each dodecahedron a different size? If it was a standardized tool, shouldn't they all be the same? And why did they disappear from the archaeological record after the 4th century? Did their purpose just cease to exist with the fall of the Western Roman Empire? Number 12. Why did hunter-gatherers build the world's first temple? For a long time, the story of human civilization seemed straightforward. First, people learned to farm. Agriculture led to permanent settlements. Once people were settled, they had the time and resources to build complex societies, develop religion, and construct large monuments like temples. This was the Neolithic Revolution. It was a nice, neat story. Then, in the 1990s, an archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt started digging at a site in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. What he found turned the old story on its head. Göbekli Tepe is a collection of massive, circular structures made of stone. At the center of these circles are huge, T-shaped pillars of limestone. Some are 18 feet tall and weigh up to 16 tons. These pillars are not just rough blocks of stone. They are intricately carved with images of animals: foxes, snakes, boars, scorpions, and vultures. The level of artistry is stunning, and the most shocking part is its age. Radiocarbon dating shows that Göbekli Tepe was built around 9,600 BC. That is 11,600 years ago. To put that in perspective, Göbekli Tepe is 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. It is 7,000 years older than the pyramids of Giza. It was built before the invention of pottery, before the invention of writing, before the invention of the wheel. And most importantly, it was built by people who were, as far as we can tell, hunter-gatherers. This is the central mystery. The site shows no evidence of permanent settlement. There are no houses, no cooking hearths, no signs of farming. All the animal bones found at the site are from wild species. This means that the people who built this massive temple complex were not settled farmers. They were nomadic or semi-nomadic people who came together at this spot to build something extraordinary. And Klaus Schmidt, until his death in 2014, called it the world's first cathedral on a hill. But how did they do it? Quarrying, moving, and erecting 16-ton pillars would require a huge organized workforce. Hundreds of people would have had to cooperate. They would need to be fed, housed, and directed. How could a society of hunter-gatherers living in small, scattered bands achieve this level of organization? The conventional wisdom said this was impossible without the surplus food and social structures that come with agriculture. This has led to a radical new idea championed by Schmidt and others. What if the old story has it backwards? What if it was not agriculture that led to complex society and religion, but the other way around? The theory goes like this. The immense effort of building Göbekli Tepe required hunter-gatherer groups to come together and cooperate on an unprecedented scale. Feeding this large workforce would have been a huge challenge. Perhaps this challenge is what spurred the invention of agriculture. The need to feed the temple builders might have been the catalyst for people to start domesticating wild grasses, like wheat and barley, which grew wild in this very region. In this view, the temple came first and civilization followed. The desire to build something sacred created the need for a new way of life. Around 8000 BC, after about 1,500 years of use, the people who built Göbekli Tepe did something even stranger. They deliberately buried it. They filled in the entire site with dirt, creating the artificial hill that we see today. Why would they go to the trouble of burying their own sacred temple? We have no idea. What was the religion practiced at Göbekli Tepe? The T-shaped pillars are thought to be stylized human figures, perhaps representing ancestors or gods, but we have no way of knowing for sure. Why the focus on scary animals like snakes and scorpions and animals associated with death like vultures? And why, after more than 1,000 years of effort, did they just decide to bury the entire complex and walk away? Was it a new religion replacing the old one, or did some kind of disaster convince them the site was cursed? Number 11, who were the Sea Peoples? Around 1200 BC, the world of the Eastern Mediterranean was thriving. The great Bronze Age civilizations were at their peak. The Hittite Empire controlled Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. The Mycenaean Greeks had their palace kingdoms. The new kingdom of Egypt was powerful and wealthy. Trade routes crisscrossed the sea. It was a golden age. And then it all came crashing down. In the span of a few decades, major cities were burned to the ground. Palaces were destroyed. Empires collapsed. The Hittites vanished completely. The Mycenaeans fell into a dark age. Trade stopped. Literacy was lost in many areas. It was a widespread and catastrophic collapse, and according to the records of the Egyptians, one of the primary culprits was a mysterious group of invaders they called the Peoples of the Sea. Our main source of information comes from the inscriptions on the temple walls of the pharaoh Ramesses III at Medinet Habu. He describes a massive attack on Egypt around 1177 BC by a confederation of different tribes who came from the sea and by land. The inscription says, "The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. No land could stand before their arms." And Ramesses III claims to have won a great victory against them in a naval battle in the Nile Delta, saving Egypt from the destruction that had befallen its neighbors. The temple walls have dramatic carvings showing Egyptian ships fighting, ships filled with feathered, helmeted warriors. But who were these sea peoples? The Egyptian records give us a list of names for the different tribes in the Confederation: the Peliset, the Checker, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, the Weshesh. The problem is we are not entirely sure where any of them came from. This is one of the biggest questions in ancient history. There are many theories. One of the most popular is that the Peliset were the Philistines, who later settled on the coast of Canaan and became famous as the enemies of the Israelites in the Bible. This is supported by archaeological evidence of a new type of pottery and architecture in that region that appears around this time and has links to the Aegean. What about the others? The Shekelesh might have come from Sicily. The Denyen could be connected to the Danons, one of the names for the Greeks in Homer's Iliad. Some have even linked the Shurden, another group mentioned in earlier texts as mercenaries for Egypt, with Sardinia. The big question is, what set them in motion? Why did this huge migration and wave of destruction happen? It was not just a military invasion, it was entire populations on the move, with their families in ox carts. One theory is that widespread drought and famine in their homelands forced them to seek new places to live. The climate data from tree rings and lake sediments does suggest that this period saw a severe climate shift in the eastern Mediterranean. Another theory points to a systems collapse. The interconnected world of the late Bronze Age was fragile. If one part of the system, like a major trading partner, collapsed, it could create a domino effect leading to economic hardship, social unrest, and piracy, which could have snowballed into the massive raids described by the Egyptians. The Sea Peoples are like ghosts. They appear on the stage of history cause chaos and destruction on an epic scale and then vanish, either defeated or assimilated into the new cultures that rose from the ashes of the old world. We see their effects everywhere, but the people themselves remain faceless, their motives and origins shrouded in mystery. They were the catalyst that ended an entire age. Where exactly did each of the tribes of the Sea Peoples originate? Was it really a unified confederation, or just a bunch of separate groups that the Egyptians lumped together? Was their migration primarily caused by climate change, political upheaval, or something else entirely? And how much of the destruction of the Bronze Age can be blamed on them versus other factors like earthquakes, internal rebellions, and plague? Number 10 were the Terra mummies, lost Europeans in ancient China. In the 1970s and 80s, Chinese archaeologists were excavating in the Tarim Basin in Xinjiang province in the far west of China. It is a harsh, dry region, home to the Taklamakan Desert. Buried in the sand, they found something completely unexpected. They found mummies. These were not Egyptian-style mummies, wrapped in linen. They were naturally preserved by the dry, salty soil and the cold, arid air. But the truly shocking thing was not the preservation, but the appearance of the people themselves. These mummies, some dating back as far as 2000 BC, did not look East Asian. They had long noses, deep-set eyes, and hair that was reddish-brown or blonde. One of the most famous, a woman nicknamed the Beauty of Lulin, had long, fair hair. Another, a tall man known as Churchin Man, had a reddish beard and wore clothing made of wool, woven in a plaid pattern that looked remarkably Celtic. They were tall, much taller than was typical for the people of ancient China. They looked, for all the world, like Europeans. So what were people who looked European doing in the middle of Central Asia 4,000 years ago? This discovery was politically sensitive and challenged the simple story of China's isolated origins. For years, the discoveries were not widely publicized, but eventually, the evidence became too significant to ignore. The work of scholars like Victor Mayer, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, brought the mummies to international attention through his book, The Tarim Mummies. Genetic testing was the next logical step. Early DNA tests in the 1990s seemed to confirm the European link, showing genetic markers common in Western Eurasia. This led to a popular theory that these people were migrants from the West. They were likely speakers of an Indo-European language, a family of languages that includes English, Russian, and Hindi. This fits with the discovery of Tocharian, an extinct Indo-European language that was spoken in the Tarim Basin much later, around 500 to 1000 AD. The mummies were thought to be the ancestors of the Tocharians, bringing their language and culture from somewhere in Europe or the steppes near the Black Sea. But the story got more complicated. More recent advanced genetic studies have painted a different picture. A major study published in the journal Nature in 2021 analyzed the genomes of 13 of the earliest mummies. The results were a surprise. They found that these people were not recent migrants from the West. They were a local population directly descended from an ancient Ice Age Asian population that was once widespread but had largely disappeared. They were genetically isolated. They did not seem to have mixed with their neighbors for thousands of years. So they were not Europeans who migrated to China. They were a local group who happened to have physical features that we associate with Europeans today. But this new finding creates its own set of mysteries. If they were genetically isolated, where did their culture come from? Their farming techniques, wheat, barley, dairy, and their animal husbandry, sheep, goats, cattle, all seem to have originated in the West, in places like the Fertile Crescent and the mountains of Central Asia. Their plaid wool clothing is also culturally linked to the West. So it seems they were a genetically local population who adopted a completely foreign Western culture. They were genetically from the East, but lived like they were from the West. This is a very strange combination. It means their ideas, technologies, and culture traveled, but the people who originated them did not, at least not in large numbers. How did this cultural transmission happen without a significant migration of people? Who were the people who brought these Western ideas and technologies to the Tarim Basin? Were they a small group of traders or missionaries whose DNA did not leave a major mark on the local population? How did this genetically isolated group maintain its identity for so long in a region that would later become a crossroads of empires on the Silk Road? And what happened to them? Did they eventually die out, or were they absorbed into the later waves of migration from East Asia? Number 9. What created the Shroud of Turin? The Shroud of Turin is one of the most famous and controversial relics in the world. It is a long linen cloth, about 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide. Imprinted on the cloth is the faint sepia-colored image of a man, front and back. The image is of a naked man with a beard and long hair. He bears wounds that are consistent with the biblical accounts of crucifixion marks on his wrists and feet, small wounds around his forehead like those from a crown of thorns, and a larger wound in his side. For millions of believers, this is the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ, and the image was miraculously formed at the moment of his resurrection. The history of the shroud is murky. It first appears definitively in the historical record in the 1350s in Liry, France, in the possession of a knight named Geoffroy de Charny. The local bishop immediately declared it a fake, claiming to know the artist who painted it. The Vatican has always been cautious, never officially declaring it to be the true burial cloth of Jesus, but referring to it as an icon, a powerful reminder of Christ's suffering. The scientific study of the shroud began in earnest in 1898 when an amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was allowed to photograph it. When he developed the photographic plates, he was stunned. The image on the shroud was a negative. The faint image on the cloth, when turned into a photographic negative, became a clear, positive image of a man's face and body. This was a shocking discovery. It suggested the image was not a simple painting. A medieval forger would have had to paint a perfect negative image, something that seems incredibly unlikely before the invention of photography. The modern scientific debate kicked into high gear in 1978 when a team of scientists, the Shroud of Turin Research Project STURP, was given unprecedented access to the shroud for 5 days of continuous testing. The team, composed mostly of American scientists, concluded in their 1981 final report that the image was not the result of paint, dyes, or stains. They found that the image resides only on the very topmost fibers of the linen, with no signs of pigment. They could not explain how the image was formed. The biggest blow to the shroud's authenticity came in 1988. The Vatican allowed small samples to be cut from the cloth for radiocarbon dating. 3 separate laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona dated the linen. Their results were all in agreement. The linen of the shroud dated to between 1260 and 1390 AD. This matches perfectly with the time it first appeared in France. The case seemed closed. The shroud was a brilliant medieval forgery, but the debate did not end there. Proponents of the shroud's authenticity have raised questions about the 1988 carbon dating. They argue that the sample was taken from a corner of the shroud that may have been repaired in the Middle Ages with newer thread after being damaged in a fire. They also point to other evidence, like the type of weave of the cloth and the pollen grains found on it, which some say are from plants unique to the Jerusalem area. More recent chemical analysis has suggested that the dating results could have been skewed by contamination over the centuries. So, we are left with a paradox. The carbon dating says it is medieval. The unique properties of the image, its negativity, its lack of pigment, its three-dimensional information encoded in the shading 9, are very hard to explain with medieval technology. If it is a forgery, it is a work of genius unlike anything else from that period. If it is authentic, then the radiocarbon dating, one of our most reliable scientific tools, must be wrong. If it is a medieval forgery, what technique was used to create such a strange and detailed negative image? No one has been able to successfully replicate it. If the carbon dating was wrong due to contamination or a repair patch, will the Vatican ever allow a new test on a different part of the cloth? Is there any scientific process, natural or otherwise, that could create such an image on a cloth that was wrapped around a body? And ultimately, can science ever truly prove or disprove an object that is, for so many, an article of faith? Number 8, how was the Great Pyramid of Giza really built? The Great Pyramid of Giza is the last of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing. It is a monument to human ingenuity and power, built as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BC. It was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Its statistics are staggering. It is made of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, mostly limestone and granite. The total weight is around 6 million tons. The base is almost perfectly square, and its sides are aligned to the 4 cardinal directions with incredible accuracy. The enduring mystery is not why it was built, but how. How did a civilization that lacked the wheel for transport, not pottery, iron tools, and modern machinery, manage to quarry, transport, and lift millions of massive stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, and assemble them into a nearly 500-foot tall structure with such precision? The traditional theory, which you see in movies, is that it was built using giant, long, straight ramps. Tens of thousands of workers would drag the stones up the ramp on wooden sledges. The problem with this theory is one of logistics and physics. To reach the top of the pyramid, a straight ramp would have had to be over a mile long to have a gentle enough slope. Building such a ramp would have required as much material and labor as the pyramid itself. And there is no archaeological evidence that such a massive ramp ever existed. This has led to other ramp theories. One popular idea is a spiral ramp that corkscrewed around the outside of the pyramid as it was built. This would require less material. A French architect, Jean-Pierre Houdin, used 3D modeling to propose a variation of this, an internal ramp. He suggests that the lower third of the pyramid was built using a short external ramp. Then, the builders constructed a spiral ramp inside the pyramid's outer walls to haul the blocks to the top. This would explain why we see no evidence of a large external ramp. In 2007, Houdin and Egyptologist Bob Breer presented this theory, pointing to certain anomalies in the pyramid structure that could be evidence of this internal tunnel. Another part of the puzzle is how they got the heavy granite beams for the king's chamber so high up in the structure. A recent discovery has provided a fascinating clue. In 2013, an archaeological team led by Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass discovered a papyrus at a site on the Red Sea called Wadi al-Jarf. Known as the Diary of Muir, it is the journal of a low-level official who led a team of 40 elite workers during the reign of Khufu. This is the only known first-hand account of the pyramid's construction. Muir describes how his team would transport limestone blocks from a quarry at Tura to Giza. They used boats on the Nile and a system of man-made canals that brought the water right up to the base of the pyramid. This discovery, detailed in the 2017 documentary Egypt's Great Pyramid, The New Evidence, solved the mystery of how they transported the stones from distant quarries, but not how they lifted them into place. There are also more fringe theories. Some have suggested the Egyptians used water locks, or even that the blocks were not quarried stone but a form of ancient concrete cast in place. And of course, the idea of alien intervention is always present in popular culture, though it has no scientific backing. The truth is likely a combination of brilliant engineering and immense human labor. We know from records that the workers were not slaves, but skilled, paid laborers who took pride in their work. But the exact techniques they used, the master plan that guided them, remains one of history's greatest engineering secrets. If an internal ramp was used, will we ever be able to confirm its existence without damaging the pyramid? How did they achieve the incredible precision of the casing stones, which were polished so smooth and fitted so perfectly that the pyramid would have shone like a jewel? What kind of organizational genius was required to manage a workforce of tens of thousands of people for over 20 years, keeping them fed, housed, and motivated? And are there still hidden chambers and passageways inside the pyramid, as some researchers suspect, that could hold the final clues? Number 7, did the city of Atlantis actually exist? There is no lost city that captures the imagination quite like Atlantis. The story comes to us from the Greek philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BC. And Plato describes Atlantis as a powerful and advanced naval power that existed some 9,000 years before his own time. It was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is what the ancients called the Strait of Gibraltar. This island kingdom was larger than Libya and Asia combined. It was a marvel of engineering with concentric rings of land and water and a magnificent capital city. But the people of Atlantis grew arrogant and corrupt. In a single day and night of misfortune, the island was destroyed by earthquakes and floods and sank into the sea, lost forever. The big question is, was Plato telling a true story, or was it a fable? Plato is our only primary source for the story of Atlantis. No other ancient writer from his time or before mentions it. This has led most historians and archaeologists to conclude that Atlantis was a myth, a cautionary tale invented by Plato to explore his ideas about politics, power, and divine justice. He used the story of a perfect society corrupted by hubris to criticize his own city of Athens. But that has not stopped people from looking for it. The search for Atlantis is a cottage industry of its own. People have claimed to have found it all over the world. The locations proposed range from the Caribbean and the coast of Spain to Antarctica and the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. One of the most compelling and scientifically plausible theories links the Atlantis story to a real historical event, the volcanic eruption of Thera. Thera, now the Greek island of Santorini, was home to a flourishing Minoan settlement. Around 1600 BC, the volcano at the center of the island erupted in one of the largest explosions in human history. It blew the center out of the island, triggered massive tsunamis that would have devastated the coasts of Crete and the surrounding islands, and sent a plume of ash around the globe. The Minoan civilization, a powerful naval culture, went into a steep decline shortly after this event. The theory, popularized by archaeologists like Spyridon Marinatos, who excavated the Minoan site of Akrotiri on Santorini, is that the memory of this cataclysmic event was passed down through generations. Over 1,000 years, the story was embellished and transformed, and Plato heard this distorted version and used it as the basis for his Atlantis story. The details match up in some interesting ways. A powerful island civilization destroyed by a natural disaster. The problem is the timeline and location. Plato says Atlantis was 9,000 years before his time and beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The Thera eruption was only 1,200 years before his time and in the Aegean Sea. Proponents of the theory argue that the numbers could have been mistranslated or exaggerated by Plato for dramatic effect. Other theories continue to pop up. In 2011, a team led by Professor Richard Freund of the University of Hartford claimed to have found evidence of Atlantis in the mud flats of southern Spain. Using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, they identified what they believed to be the remains of a city buried in the marshlands, which they linked to ancient accounts of a city destroyed by a tsunami. But this claim, like many others, has been met with skepticism from the wider archaeological community. Atlantis remains a story, a powerful myth that we seem to want to be true. If Plato did invent the story, was it entirely from his imagination, or was he inspired by a real, albeit less dramatic, historical event that we have not yet identified? Could the numbers in his account be a simple translation error where hundreds was mistaken for thousands, placing the event in a more recent, plausible time frame? And why, despite the overwhelming lack of evidence, does the idea of a lost, advanced civilization continue to have such a powerful hold on the human psyche? Number 6. What caused the collapse of the Indus Valley civilization? About 5,000 years ago, at the same time as ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, another great civilization was flourishing. This was the Indus Valley civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization. It was located in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, and it was enormous. It covered more territory than Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. At its peak, it may have been home to 5 million people, about 10% of the world's population at the time. The Harappans built some of the world's first and most impressive planned cities, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa. These cities had grid-like street patterns, advanced water management systems with public baths and covered drains, and houses made of standardized baked bricks. They had a sophisticated system of weights and measures. They traded with Mesopotamia, and they had their own system of writing, a complex script of symbols found on small stone seals. But there are two huge mysteries about them. First, we cannot read their writing. Like the Phaistos Disc, the Indus script remains undeciphered, the texts are too short, and there is no Rosetta Stone to help us crack it. The second and bigger mystery is why they disappeared. Around 1900 BC, this great civilization began to decline. The cities were gradually abandoned. The writing system fell out of use. Trade stopped. By 1300 BC, it was gone and its cities were buried under the soil, not to be rediscovered until the 1920s. What happened to them? For a long time, the leading theory was that they were wiped out by an invasion. In the 1940s, the archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler, who excavated at Harappa, proposed that Aryan invaders from the north swept down into the subcontinent and destroyed the Indus cities. He pointed to some unburied skeletons found in the streets of Mohenjo-daro as evidence of a final massacre. This Aryan invasion theory was very popular for a while. However, modern archaeology has found very little evidence to support it. The skeletons do not show signs of battle wounds, and there is no layer of ash or destruction at the sites that would indicate a massive invasion. Most scholars today have abandoned this theory. So what is the current thinking? The focus has shifted to environmental factors. The Indus Valley civilization was heavily dependent on its rivers, particularly the Indus and the now dry Ghaggar-Hakra River. Many researchers believe that climate change was the main culprit in their downfall. A study published in the journal Climate of the Past in 2018 by a team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution looked at sediment cores from the Arabian Sea. They found evidence of a significant shift in the monsoon patterns around 2000 BC. The summer monsoons, which the Harappans relied on for agriculture, became weaker and less predictable. This would have led to crop failures and made it impossible to support the large populations of the cities. Another related theory is that tectonic activity changed the courses of the rivers. The Ghaggar-Hakra, which may have been the mythical Sarasvati River from ancient Hindu texts, was a massive river that supported many Harappan cities. Geological evidence suggests that earthquakes may have diverted the river's water sources, causing it to dry up. This would have been a catastrophic event for the people living along its banks. It was likely not a single event, but a slow process. The environmental changes probably led to a breakdown of the complex urban society. People would have gradually moved away from the big cities, breaking up into smaller, more rural communities, moving east towards the more reliable rainfall of the Ganges Plain. The civilization did not so much collapse as it deurbanized and transformed. But because we cannot read their writing, we have no record of this period. We do not know if they knew what was happening, if they tried to fight it, or if they just slowly faded away. Without being able to read their scripts, can we ever truly know what the Harappans thought about their own world and its end? How did their highly organized, egalitarian-seeming society? There are no grand palaces or royal tombs cope with decades or centuries of environmental stress. And how much of their culture, their genes, and their stories survived and were passed down to become part of the later cultures of India? Number 5, what was the Antikythera mechanism? In the year 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers were sheltering from a storm near the small island of Antikythera. When the storm passed, they decided to dive in the area. What they found was an ancient Roman shipwreck, filled with statues and other treasures. Over the next year, archaeologists salvaged what they could from the wreck. Among the bronze and marble statues, there was a lump of corroded bronze, about the size of a shoebox. It was dismissed as an unimportant piece of junk and sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens for 2 years. Then an archaeologist noticed that it had a gear wheel inside it. That was the beginning of the story of the Antikythera mechanism. As scientists began to study the corroded lump, they realized it was something extraordinary. X-rays and advanced imaging techniques have revealed a complex system of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears. It was an incredibly sophisticated mechanical device, and it dated to around 100 BC. Nothing even close to this level of complexity is known to have existed again for another 1,400 years, until the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe. It is a true out-of-place artifact. So what was it? For decades, researchers have been trying to piece together this ancient puzzle. The work of scholars like Derek Price in the 1950s and 60s, and more recently, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, has given us a much clearer picture. The mechanism was an astronomical calculator. It was a mechanical computer. It had a handle on the side that you would turn to set it to a specific date. On the front, a dial showed the position of the sun and the moon in the zodiac. It also had a pointer for the moon that showed its phase. It was incredibly accurate. On the back, two large spiral dials showed other information. One was a calendar of lunar and solar eclipses. It could predict when an eclipse was likely to happen and even what color the moon might be. The other dial showed the timing of the ancient Olympic Games and other major Pan-Hellenic festivals. Inscriptions on the device, now partially readable, are like a user's manual explaining how it works. The mystery is not so much what it was, but how it existed. The level of astronomical knowledge and mechanical engineering required to design and build such a device is breathtaking. The ancient Greeks, like Hipparchus and Archimedes, were known to be brilliant astronomers and mathematicians. Cicero even mentions a mechanical sphere built by Archimedes that showed the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. But nobody imagined they could translate that theoretical knowledge into such a complex, miniaturized, geared device. Where did this technology come from? The mechanism seems to have been made on the island of Rhodes, which was a center for astronomy and engineering at the time. But was it a one-of-a-kind masterpiece, or were there many of these devices in the ancient world, and this is just the only one that happened to survive? If there are others, why have we never found any trace of them? The knowledge to build something like this seems to have been completely lost. After the fall of Rome, Europe entered a long period where this level of mechanical skill simply vanished. It is as if someone invented a laptop in the age of the abacus, and then everyone forgot how to make it. Who was the genius who designed this? Was it a single person or a school of engineers? Why was this technological tradition lost so completely that it had to be reinvented over a millennium later? Were there even more complex devices that we have not found, perhaps ones that also track the movements of the planets? And what else did the ancient world know that we have forgotten? Number 4, what does the Voynich manuscript mean? In the library of Yale University, there is a book that has frustrated and fascinated everyone who has ever tried to read it. It is called the Voynich manuscript. It is a small book, about 240 pages long. It is filled with illustrations and handwritten text. The illustrations are bizarre. There are drawings of plants that do not match any known species on Earth. There are astronomical charts with strange zodiac signs. And most famously, there are pages showing small naked women bathing in pools connected by an elaborate network of pipes. But the real mystery is the text. The manuscript is written in a script that is completely unknown. It is a flowing, elegant script made up of about 20 to 30 unique characters. The text is written from left to right. It looks like a real language. It follows statistical patterns that are found in natural languages. For example, some characters appear more often than others, and some combinations of characters are more common, just like in English. But nobody, not the world's best cryptographers, not professional linguists, not artificial intelligence programs, has been able to decipher a single word of it. The manuscript gets its name from Wilfred Voynich, a Polish book dealer who bought it in 1912 from a Jesuit college in Italy. Its history before that is patchy, but it is believed to have been owned by the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II in the 16th century, who was a famous collector of strange and occult objects. Radiocarbon dating of the vellum animal skin pages was done in 2009 at the University of Arizona. The results were conclusive. The vellum dates to the early 15th century, between 1404 and 1438. This means the book is a genuine medieval artifact. So what is it? The theories fall into a few main categories. The first is that it is a real text written in a real but unknown language. Perhaps it is a language from a small, isolated community that has since died out. Or maybe it is a known language that has been deliberately disguised using a substitution cipher, where each letter of the original language is replaced by a symbol from the Voynich alphabet. The problem is that every attempt to break it as a simple cipher has failed. The patterns in the text do not match the patterns of any known European or Asian language. The second category of theories is that it is a hoax. Perhaps it is just gibberish, a meaningless string of characters created to look like a real book, possibly to fool a wealthy collector like Emperor Rudolph II. The problem with the hoax theory is that creating 240 pages of text that so perfectly mimics the statistical properties of a real language would be incredibly difficult, especially in the 15th century. It seems to be too complex to be random gibberish. A third, more recent idea is that it is a kind of medical or herbal encyclopedia, perhaps for women's health, given the illustrations. In 2017, a history researcher named Nicholas Gibbs claimed in the Times Literary Supplement that he had partially deciphered it as a set of Latin abbreviations. His theory was widely criticized and quickly debunked by other scholars. In 2019, Gerard Cheshire, an academic at the University of Bristol, published a paper claiming it was written in a Proto-Romance language and was a compendium of information for a Dominican nun. This claim was also met with extreme skepticism, and the university distanced itself from the research. Every few years, someone claims to have cracked it, but none of the solutions have stood up to scrutiny. The Voynich manuscript is the ultimate unsolved code. It is a book we can see but not read. It is a window into a world that is completely alien to us, filled with strange plants and mysterious rituals. But whether that world was real or just the product of a brilliant and bizarre imagination, we still do not know. Is it written in a lost language, a complex code, or is it the most elaborate and successful literary hoax in history? What do the strange illustrations represent? Are they real plants and astronomical events, or are they symbolic and fantastical? And who was the author? Was it a lonely genius, a secret society, or a clever con artist? Number 3, why did the Indus Valley civilization seem so peaceful? We have already talked about the mystery of the Indus Valley civilization's collapse. But there's another equally profound mystery about them. They seem to have been remarkably peaceful and egalitarian. When we look at the other great civilizations of the Bronze Age, like Egypt and Mesopotamia, their archaeology is full of evidence of kings, wars, and a rigid social hierarchy. We find grand palaces for the rulers, massive temples for the gods, and extravagant royal tombs filled with treasure, like Tutankhamun's in Egypt or the royal tombs of Ur in Mesopotamia. We find carvings and texts that glorify kings, celebrate military victories, and depict armies marching into battle. War was a central part of their culture. The Indus Valley civilization is completely different. In over 1,000 excavated sites, archaeologists have found no grand palaces. There are no obvious royal tombs. There are large public buildings like the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, but nothing that looks like the home of a powerful king. The cities are large and well organized, but the houses are surprisingly uniform in size and construction. This suggests a much more equitable distribution of wealth than in other ancient societies. There was a social structure, of course, but it does not seem to have been a top-down authoritarian one. Even more striking is the almost total lack of evidence for warfare. Archaeologists have found very few weapons. The art does not depict scenes of battle or conquest. The cities have walls, but they seem to have been built more for flood control and managing trade than for military defense against organized armies. Compare this to Mesopotamia, where cities were heavily fortified fortresses. As archaeologist Gregory Poseel wrote in his book, The Indus Age, the Writing System, the Harappans seem to have been a peaceful people. So how did they manage it? How did they build and run a civilization that spanned 1 million square kilometers with dozens of cities and towns without the kind of powerful kings and armies that seemed necessary everywhere else? It is a huge puzzle. One theory is that power was not held by kings and warriors, but by a class of priests or merchants. The social order might have been maintained through shared religious beliefs and control over trade and technology rather than through military force. The uniformity of the cities, with their standardized bricks and weights, suggests a high degree of central control, but maybe that control was economic and ideological, not military. Perhaps the rulers, whoever they were, projected their power through symbols of purity like the Great Bath and Order, rather than through images of violence. Another possibility is that we are simply misinterpreting the evidence. Perhaps the rulers did not build huge palaces, or we just have not found them yet. Maybe their weapons were made of perishable materials that have not survived. Or perhaps their warfare was of a kind that does not leave obvious archaeological traces. Some scholars, like Jane McIntosh in the Ancient Indus Valley New Perspectives, argue that we should not be too quick to label them as a utopia without weapons, and that a lack of evidence is not evidence of absence. Still, the contrast with their contemporaries is undeniable. The Indus Valley civilization presents us with a model of a complex urban society that seems to have rejected the glorification of war and the concentration of power in the hands of a single divine ruler. It is a tantalizing glimpse of a different way of organizing a civilization. But because we cannot read their script, the people who created this unique society cannot tell us how they did it, or why it ultimately failed. How was social order maintained across such a vast territory without a powerful military or a visible king? Were they truly a peaceful society, or are we just missing the evidence of their conflicts? If power was held by priests or traders, how did that system work in practice? And did this unique social structure make them more vulnerable to the environmental and social stresses that eventually led to their decline? Number 2, what lies inside the Great Pyramids: hidden voids. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not just a mystery on the outside, the inside is just as puzzling. For centuries, we thought we knew its layout. There is a descending passage that leads to an unfinished subterranean chamber. There is an ascending passage that leads up to the Queen's Chamber, and the magnificent Grand Gallery, which in turn leads to the main King's Chamber, where the pharaoh's sarcophagus was found empty. For a long time, that was thought to be it. But what if there is more? The pyramid is a solid mass of stone, and exploring it without causing damage is almost impossible. But in recent years, new technology has given us a way to see inside the pyramid without touching it. This technology is called muography. Muons are subatomic particles that are created when cosmic rays hit the Earth's atmosphere. They rain down on us all the time. They can pass through hundreds of feet of stone, but they are deflected or absorbed when they hit denser material. By placing special detectors inside or around the pyramid, scientists can track the path of these muons. If there is a void or a chamber inside the stone, more muons will pass through that area, creating a hot spot on the detectors. It is like taking an X-ray of the pyramid. In 2017, a project called Scan Pyramids, a collaboration of international researchers, announced a stunning discovery. They had been using muography to scan the Great Pyramid, and they found something big. In a paper published in the journal Nature, they revealed the existence of a large, previously unknown void located directly above the Grand Gallery. This void, which they named the Scan Pyramid's Big Void, is at least 100 feet long and is similar in size to the Grand Gallery itself. It is the first major new structural discovery inside the Great Pyramid since the 19th century. What is this void? We have no idea. The Scan Pyramids team was very careful not to call it a chamber. It could be a hidden corridor, a series of rooms, or just a structural feature designed to relieve weight from the Grand Gallery below. The builders of the pyramids were masters of engineering, and they built 5 small relieving chambers above the King's Chamber for this very purpose. The Big Void could be something similar on a much grander scale, but it could also be something more. It could be a hidden passage leading to the real burial chamber of Khufu. Some Egyptologists have long suspected that the King's Chamber we know is just a decoy, and that the pharaoh's true resting place with all its treasures is still hidden somewhere inside the pyramid's massive structure, safe from tomb robbers. The discovery of the Big Void has given new life to this theory. The Scan Pyramids project also confirmed the existence of a smaller void, a corridor located behind the north face of the pyramid, near the main entrance. In 2023, scientists were able to get a tiny endoscopic camera into this smaller corridor. The footage revealed a simple, unfinished passageway, likely another structural feature. But the Big Void remains completely inaccessible and unexplored. There is no known passage that leads to it. Getting inside would require drilling, something the Egyptian authorities are very reluctant to approve. So for now, the void is a tantalizing mystery, a huge blank space on the map of the world's most famous monument. It is a reminder that even the most studied ancient structure on Earth still has profound secrets to reveal. We have been exploring this pyramid for thousands of years, and it can still surprise us. What was the purpose of the Big Void? Is it a brilliant piece of structural engineering, a secret construction passage, or does it lead to a hidden chamber containing the secrets of Pharaoh Khufu? Will we ever find a way to explore it without damaging the pyramid? And what other undiscovered secrets are still locked away inside the millions of tons of stone at Giza? Number 1, what is consciousness? This might seem like a strange mystery to include in a list of ancient ones, but it is the oldest mystery of them all. It is the fundamental question that has kept philosophers, spiritual leaders, and now scientists up at night for thousands of years. What is this thing we call consciousness? What is this inner private experience of being you? You are not just a collection of cells that responds to stimuli. You have feelings, thoughts, memories, and a sense of self. You are aware. But what is that awareness? Where does it come from? Ancient cultures had their own answers. The Egyptians believed the soul had many parts, and the heart, not the brain, was the seat of intelligence and memory. The ancient Greeks, like Plato, believed the soul was an immortal entity separate from the physical body. Philosophers, for centuries, have debated the mind-body problem. Are the mind and the body two separate things, or is the mind simply what the brain does? In the 17th century, René Descartes famously argued for dualism, the idea that the mind is a non-physical substance. Today, the scientific consensus is that consciousness is a product of the brain. It is an emergent property of the complex network of billions of neurons firing in our heads. But that is not really an answer, it is just a restatement of the problem. How does the firing of neurons, which is just a physical, electrical, and chemical process, create the subjective, qualitative experience of seeing the color red, or feeling sad, or tasting a strawberry? This is what philosopher David Chalmers famously called the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems are things like figuring out how the brain processes information, how it controls behavior, and how it focuses attention. We are making progress on those. But the hard problem of experience itself remains untouched. We have learned a lot about the brain. We can use fMRI scanners to see which parts of the brain are active when we think, feel, or perceive. We have identified certain areas, like the colostrum or the thalamus, that seem to play a key role in integrating information and creating a unified conscious experience. Neuroscientists like Christoph Koch and the late Francis Crick have proposed that consciousness is linked to specific patterns of synchronized firing in the brain. This is the search for the neural correlates of consciousness. But even if we find the exact brain activity that corresponds to every conscious experience, it still does not explain why that brain activity should feel like anything at all. It does not bridge the gap between the physical and the mental. The mystery of consciousness is not just about humans. Do animals have it? A dog or a chimpanzee certainly seems to be aware of its surroundings. What about an octopus with its distributed brain? Or a bee? Where do we draw the line? Some theories, like integrated information theory proposed by Giulio Tononi, suggest that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, and that any system with a certain level of complex integrated information will have some degree of consciousness. In this view, even a thermostat could have a tiny bit of it. This is the ultimate ancient mystery because it is about the very nature of our existence. All the other mysteries on this list, pyramids, lost cities, undeciphered texts, are puzzles that we observe from the outside. Consciousness is the one mystery that we are on the inside of. We are the mystery. And despite all our science and all our technology, we are no closer to solving it than the first human who looked up at the stars and wondered, what am I? Is consciousness something that is created by the brain, or is the brain more like an antenna that receives consciousness from some other source? Will we ever be able to create a truly conscious artificial intelligence, or is there something special about biological brains that we can never replicate? And if we did create a conscious AI, how would we even know for sure that it was truly aware, and not just a very clever simulation? What happens to our consciousness when we die? This is the oldest question of all, and it is the one that science may never be able to answer.